NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Nightly News viewers, we have Professor Charles Phillips from the University of Tel Aviv on international relations in Israel. He is also a renowned author. He wrote the book, The Arab Problem. So today he's going to give us a little bit of a crash course on his favorite subject, international policy. So he wants to break down three theories for us tonight: liberalism, post-colonialism, and Marxism. Thank you for joining us today, Charles.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So Charles, before we can jump into asking you questions about liberalism, we have to explain the dichotomy between the critical theories of Marxism and post-colonialism and more mainstream theories of liberalism. Could you elaborate on the difference, please?
Of course, liberalism and other mainstream theories like realism and institutionalism are referred to as positivists, meaning that they focus on empirical observation and are usually applied on a case-by-case scenario. Post-colonialism and Marxism, on the other hand, are critical theories, and they have blanket statements such as the importance of class and historical materialism and the importance of colonialism on society, and tend to create almost sort of utopians and use their own critiques to try to fix society.
Thank you for that great explanation, Chaz. But now, another quick precursor before we hop directly into liberalism. This is not your domestic liberalism when we think about conservatism versus liberalism. This is a theory of international relations, so it's how states interact with each other on a world level. So without further ado, Chaz, could you please elaborate a little bit on liberalism?
Of course. Liberalism is a positivist theory, as I had stated previously. And many people dispute on the exact origins of liberalism, but most people say it began with the Enlightenment writings of Immanuel Kant, John Locke, and Voltaire. Now, liberalism is unique because it has four basic assumptions within it. The first one is anarchy, which means that states interact on an international basis without the help of a world government, which means that states have to rely on self-help in order to survive without some larger sort of beneficiary to help bail them out. The second basis is rationality. Rationality means that states will try to avoid as many consequences or try to gain as many benefits as possible. This was best exemplified in the Realpolitik of Otto von Bismarck and Henry Kissinger, when they would ignore moral qualms to pursue beneficial foreign and domestic policy goals instead. A perfect example of this was in the 1970s when the Nixon administration opened up relations with the People's Republic of China despite years of human rights abuses. The third one is that states represent societal preferences. What this essentially means is that social groups make up the fabric of a state, and what these social groups want make the state change its behavior in order to satisfy these important societal groups. And the fourth and final unique assumption is that interdependence among states is based on these societal preferences, which means that states have to interact with one another if they want to be able to fulfill their preferences because of a limited amount of resources. Now, unlike realism and institutionalism, liberalism accepts diplomacy as a basis for statecraft instead of basic dominance. And this is a very important distinction from almost every other theory, because these four unique assumptions make liberalism the more preferred option when conducting international relations.
So Charles, you said a bit about states act in a state of anarchy. How does liberalism interpret peacekeeping things like the UN on an international scale?
Of course, excellent question. The United Nations in liberal thought is usually either considered not very useful because of their lack of power and because of the basis of international as opposed to world relations, or it is simply criticized as another structure that doesn't need to be added to the already complex web of relations between states.
Thank you for that wonderful explanation of liberalism, Charles. Now, could you tell us a little bit about Marxism's fundamental critiques and disagreements with the mainstream theory of liberalism?
Of course. Well, since Marxism is a critical theory, it means that they view the world and international society through the lens of class, and specifically the conflict between the two classes, proletarian and bourgeoisie. Now, this translates into international relations by the theory of historical materialism, which means that all conflicts throughout history have been based off of the capitalist mode of production and thus the need to attain extra resources.
Could you tell us a little bit about the sub-theory of Marxism known as world systems theories and how they view the world?
Of course, the world systems theory was founded in 1974 by my good friend Immanuel Wallerstein. And he splits up the world into three parts. The core, which are first world welfare states that provide good wages and good benefits to their citizens. The semi-periphery, which are authoritarian states, which provide lower wages and less benefits, and the periphery, with like states such as South Sudan, which have very little government whatsoever. And essentially the theory behind this is that the core gets its raw resources from the periphery and semi-periphery, and it is the desire of the core nations, the first world nations, to exploit the periphery and the semi-periphery and make sure that they remain in their place so that way they get all of the resources they need from it.
Great explanation. Now let's move on to theory of post-colonialism. Charles, could you first please explain post-colonialism to the viewers, and then I'd like to pick your brain. I have a couple questions for such a high-minded person like yourself.
Thank you very much. Post-colonialism is actually one of my favorite theories. It basically says that the Western world has dominated the other parts of the world, such as Asia, Africa, etc., through basic intellectual and military dominance. And it is mainly critical of liberalism because it fails to address the issues of race, sex, and class when conducting international relations. And it is essentially one of the most critical of both liberalism and Marxism because it believes that the world is not just based on class and it's not just based on international relations, but race features prominently in their theories. Edward Said, a good friend of mine from Jerusalem, famously said that Orientalism was the driving factor behind most of international relations, which means that the Western world viewed the Eastern world, as it were, as the other, and they tried to marginalize them as much as they could.
Thank you for that mini crash course on post-colonialism. Now I have a few personal questions. First, what would be a post-colonialist view on the settlements in Palestine, because I know you're from Israel? And then what are your own views, because you did write a book about this?
Question. Essentially, post-colonialists, especially Edward Said, who wrote the book on Palestine, view Israel as an extension of European imperialism. And this is because in several letters between different British foreign officers, they mention Israel as a perfect way to secure shipping from British India and Afghanistan back to the United Kingdom. And people view Israel's settlements as a further extension of what is known as settler colonialism, where they are displacing the indigenous Arab population and replacing them with the Jewish Israeli population.
Okay, great explanation. Now, what would be your own view on this?
I'd like for a second to quote the great Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here and say, who are these Arabs? And the reason why I say this is because what right do Arabs have to the land of Israel? God promised us this land in Genesis after Abraham was leaving whatever her name was from the Bible. I can't remember what it was. And furthermore, it is essentially negated because Palestine was not even called Palestine in the past. The Romans changed the name of the province of Judea to Palestine to punish the Jews during the Jewish revolt. Arabs have absolutely no right to live in the land of Israel, and as a matter of fact, I would call that Arab settlement being colonialism in and of itself.
Thank you for that great exposition. I don't think I could have said it better myself. It's been a bumpy ride learning these three theories, but it's been fantastic as well. We learned about international cooperation, ethnocentrism, and the class struggle. It was fantastic having you, Charles.
It's been a pleasure to be a part of this crash course.
And I hope you will join us for our next special report on CBN. Thank you.